Find our seats. We can find our seats. We can get started. My name is Jay Culligan. I'm your executive director of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus. A couple of yeah, there we go. All right. Thank you very much. So, a couple of quick announcements. We want to thank our sponsors, including the Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Ohio Arts Council, White Castle, Columbus Foundation, UBS, the Japan Foundation, and all the other great festival sponsors that we have. Can we give them a round of applause, please? All right, so we are at the Talk and Teach of Dressing Up History, Translating Research and Reference into Narrative Costume. This is Chris Schweizer. He is a 3-time Eisner Award-nominated cartoonist, writer, concept artist, and illustrator who lives in rural Kentucky with his wife and daughter and 2 disreputable cats. Chris has been, among other things, bear with me, a college professor, a hotel manager, a movie theater projectionist, a guard at a mental hospital, a martial arts instructor, a set builder, a church music leader, a process server, a life drawing model, a bartender, a car wash attendant, a bag boy, a delivery boy, a choir boy, a lawn boy, and a 6th grade social studies teacher, a janitor, a speakeasy proprietor, a video store clerk, a field hand, a deckhand, a puppeteer for a children's television show, a muralist, a kickboxer, and a line worker at a pancake mix factory. And now he makes comics, and he likes that job the best. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so very much for coming out today. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to see everybody here. I'm very excited to be back at CXC. It's been a few years since I've been here. I assume this will change my slides, so we will operate under that assumption, and I will try to also hold a thing while I do that. So I don't usually use lecture notes, but I want to correspond them to the slides, which I haven't used in 10 years slides, so it's been a while. I tend to do a lot of historical subject matter. It's something that's really interesting to me. It's where my interests and aesthetic inclinations drive me. So I've done a few books with that. And in addition to the books, I also do a lot of illustrations and post little online mini essays about different historical figures, and this is helpful for that. So hopefully if you are the sort who this kind of thing is of interest to you, then this will be useful. A couple of precursors for this. One, although I will speak in aphorisms and sureties, these are all my opinions based on my experience. None of this needs to be dogmatic. None of it needs to be a set in stone rule. And part of the fun of making narratives and making comics and exploring the formal components behind them is finding where you can break the rules to your benefit. So just know that going in. I'm not going to preface everything with this is my opinion. Just know that it is. I had another thought. The other thing is I'm going to be speaking about some historical research stuff in very basic foundational terms, just in case anybody is new to it. For those of you who are longstanding history buffs, I hope you won't find that boring or condescending. So in any case, let's jump to it. So basically this is going to, we're going to be discussing exclusively the visual components of design. There's a lot of stuff that we could discuss about, or a lot of things to be discussed about the content of historical narrative and the content of historical fiction, the ethics of it, all of that. We're going to leave that on the table, just talk exclusively about the visual today. Although I'm happy to discuss those things with you over the rest of the weekend. So also I'm going to be using as examples more frequently movies and television things than I am comics, just because there are more ready examples of how to approach historical accuracy or the lack thereof in comics. So starting this out, the thing that I want to look at when we're talking about comics, or when we're talking about making character designs and making environmental designs and things like that, for the sake of narrative, is that there are really 3 spheres of consideration that need to be paramount when we're discussing it. First up is accuracy. And by accuracy, I mean how closely we can correlate the available data the historical record to our designs. The next is genre convention, which is the expectations of an audience for a story set in a particular region and in a particular era. And the last is taste, which is the existing aesthetic concerns and taste that your audience is going to bring to the narrative. Basically, they're looking at it through their lens, and the aspects of genre convention and taste are things that can be disregarded, or that they can't be disregarded. They can be put aside, but they need to be put aside purposefully because they are going to directly impact the way that your audience responds to your designs, and as a result of your designs, your narrative. And so they need to be weighed, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to weigh them in relation to accuracy. Let's see. Okay, so for talking about genre convention here, something that we, in a sort of media-based society, in a society where we have movies, we have a lot of visual associations with particular eras that are born of genre convention. So the ones that tend to cast the widest shadow and have the most regularity, and it depends on where you live. Here it's Westerns, in Japan it's samurai films, it changes region to region, it changes era to era. But we have these different periods, some of which have a lot of frequency and popularity: Regency romances, World War II, war movies, etc. One of the things that we find is that genre convention, and by that I mean that the iconography that we associate with a particular era, tends to be born of low budget. So as a historical topic rises in ascendancy, usually as a result of the popularity of a specific title, that could be in fiction, that can be in TV. Right now, last few years it's been, a while ago it was Mad Men, then it was Peaky Blinders, it's Vikings. There are different things that become popular enough that they sort of spawn these subgenres of low budget imitators. And all of them tend to compound these things. So, we have, like Shaw Brothers movies set in the early Qing Dynasty. We've got Westerns, we've got pirate movies, we've got Gothic Victorian horror, we've got peplum, we've got knights in shining armor. Now, currently we're in a glut of Viking stuff. What happens in these instances is that there tend to be they tend to have lower budgets, and so they start to pull from the most basic visual signifiers that originate with these more popular fare. And the more that these happen, the more that they start to translate into other media, and into cartoons, into illustrations, into advertisements. And that tends to permeate the popular consciousness to the point that we start to associate very specific visual cues for specific eras. And so as a result of that, pretty much anything Egyptian is 19th dynasty, anything Greek is classical, anything Roman is early imperial, anything Western is 1875. Victorians, you've got Dickensian and Sherlockian, the later stuff tends to be the stuff that we see most often because it was the cheaper to costume. You get an old suit, you put a top hat on it, you've got a Victorian costume. And so we start to recognize these visual signifiers, and these are important. Like there are negative aspects to these regimented genre conventions, but there are bonuses to them as well. If we look at historical eras, anybody here who's read historical novels or something like that, it can be really difficult to jump right in. Like a lot of times you're really struggling for context. It's like watching a foreign film from a country that you know nothing about. And so sometimes that first watch through, you are working as hard to establish for yourself a context for the narrative as you are paying attention to the context itself. That can be something that you strive for, but it can also be a hindrance to the type of story that you're telling. And that's where genre convention can be your friend. and start to pull from stuff. So an example of when it's purposefully obscured, a movie that I really love is Gangs of New York. And for the opening of that, Scorsese and his costume designer, Sandy Powell, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, purposefully eschews any visual signifiers that suggest when and where it's taking place. And so for the first 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes, it feels like a long time, it's probably short. There's this big fight scene, there's all this stuff happening, and you have no idea, is this the Middle Ages? Is it something like, everybody's using edged and clubbed weapons? It's very, it feels very old world, and this is deliberate on Scorsese's part because it waits until this is over to pull back and you see a wide shot of New York and it says New York 1840, because he's wanting to separate this from any kind of association that you have with the era and with the period in order to sort of create this blank slate and make you feel unmoored. And that sense of feeling unmoored is the main issue that you're wrestling with. So like a couple of examples came out within a few years of each other. Jeremiah Johnson and the Wild Bunch. Jeremiah Johnson set in 1847, the Wild Bunch is set in 1913. But they're both ostensibly Westerns, and so even though they pay heed, to the specific trappings of their era and do a good job with it, they also lean pretty heavily on Western iconography. Belts with weapons on them hanging over, cowboy hats, things like that, which are used pretty minimally historically, but it's an important signifier for your audience to give them a sense of place that they can attach to, and then you can sort of start to deviate with the specificity. Okay, so the good things about genre convention, shorthand in its context, it also gives you opportunities for that kind of deviation where your audience knows what a Western is like, and so when you deviate from that, you are saying specific things about your particular story, about your particular aesthetic leanings, things like that, and that can be really exciting. The downsides for them is that inaccuracies can compound unintentionally and potentially, especially if you're doing a nonfiction work or a dramatization of a nonfiction work or something that you want to have credence and that you want to use to convey specific facts and theses to your audience, that can undermine that. So you want to be careful about that. The other thing is that it can make it difficult to distinguish a story from another. Those aesthetics and design start to all blend in together, and so those are things that you have to wrestle with genre convention. Going back to accuracy, so when we talk about accuracy, we are talking about the degree to which we align our designs with the data that we have from the past. And I say data, not evidence, because evidence is data used to prove a point. The data that we have is in itself, in theory, subjective, but its availability is objective. Its availability is subjective. That data exists at all is a reflection of not only the priorities of the time in which it was created, but the priorities of every era since that has determined whether or not it is worth preserving or at least worth not destroying, whether or not its existence can be used to champion a current thing, etc. So it also, one of the big issues that you'll struggle with if you're working with historical narrative is that there are a lot of resources for rich people and not a lot of resources for poor people. You can find lots of wealthy architecture. It's really hard to find a cutaway of a hovel. And so that can be a real source of frustration. That's all born of the availability of that data. And so, so the expense of mediums of record keeping as well, talking beyond just the visual, but discussing, the text sources that we have. The stuff that stays is the stuff that's in marble. It's the stuff that's in stone. It's the stuff that's in vellum. It's the stuff that was expensive to make in the first place. And its very existence is a testament to the power and wealth of the person who financed it, or a group that financed it. One of our, ironically, one of our best textual basis for information about the poor are complaints of the rich, which I love. It's great because that's where it comes from. Now, this isn't to say that your narrative attention needs to be confined specifically to royal courts and eras closer in our time, just because it gets more difficult as it goes. You may have difficulties as you move back, but that scarcity of firm data also offers with it a plethora of opportunities. Like the more vague the recipe that you have, the more spices you get to put into it. It also allows for a degree of flexibility when you are dealing with the architecture or clothing of lower classes, working classes, peasants, serfs, enslaved people, whatever it might be. Those don't tend to change with near the frequency of the wealthier people. And so if you can find documentation for somebody within roughly 50 years of what you're doing, you're golden. Sometimes it's within 100 years. Sometimes it's within 1,000, the farther back you go. And so you get to do a lot of extrapolation based on what you recognize in real life. Who, why am I blanking on her name? In Devil Wears Prada. Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep's speech about like how fashion goes from, the high fashion to what Anne Hathaway is wearing. To a degree, that kind of sensibility can be culled and pulled to just about any era. As you do have difficulties with things like, I'm blanking on the name of the law, where you're not allowed to wear blue if you're not a Miller or whatever, or Miller class. There are different specificities that do forbid certain things. But generally speaking, people get cast-offs, people get poor things, people get whatever else. And so you can pull from different elements that you've seen, and also that you've seen in your own life, and say, well, I did this, why can't my 4th century wheelwright do this? So the thing that I think is important to keep in mind when you get to that sort of thing, there's Mark Twain has a bit in his intro to The Prince and the Pauper that I love, and it's my North Star when it comes to designing or writing historical stuff. And that's that it may have happened, it may not have happened, but it could have happened. And that could have carries so much of a burden, and I love how much weight it can bear. And so talking a little bit about the could have is what I want to do. So where do we find this data? I'm mentioning finding available data, finding things. So we've got 4 different sources that we can use for historical research. So of those sources, the first one is primary sources. Now, as you get into different degrees of academia and research and things along those lines, you'll get also with it degrees of snobbery, where if it's not a primary source, it doesn't count. But the thing is, primary sources are incredibly valuable. They are also scarce, and they are also very difficult to use without practice and context, especially from a visual standpoint. When I'm talking about primary sources, basically I'm talking about something that comes from the time that you are studying, firsthand account. So in the case of visual stuff, a lot of times, and again, going back to antiquity, we're looking at reliefs that show particular events. We're looking at clothing if it has survived. We're looking at paintings, journal records, diary, letters, scrawls in the margins of an illuminated manuscript by a monk making fun of the other monk next to him. These are the primary sources that can be really useful. Blueprints, catalogs, all that kind of stuff. The difficulty with primary sources is that they do require a degree of context. And they also, again, as we move farther back, we have to make more and more assumptions and suppositions about that context. And so it does require practice to understand what it is that you're taking and to be able to see the whole from a weird thing. So to use an example, we'll talk about the Bayou Tapestry, which a lot of folks like to look at as comics. So the Bayou Tapestry depicts the events of the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So some things to keep in mind. This isn't even 1,000 years old. And when this happened, everybody in the sphere of this recognized that it was a hugely important event, which it was, and did everything they could to document as much of it as possible. That said, this tapestry is pretty much the only physical evidence that we still have from this, despite the fact that everybody knew it was such a big deal and that it was relatively recent within the span of humanity. So to talk about this and the difficulties with using primary sources and the degree of supposition that needs to be required of this is, let's look at their little armor suits. So basically, the current consensus is that, or the general consensus among historians, there's still lots of debate with it, is that these are chainmail hauberks. These are chainmail, they come down to roughly your knee. But some people look at these as metal discs that are riveted to leather. Some people think it might be an interpretation of scale mail, which is a series of overlapping small plates. It's probably regular chainmail, but there are arguments to be held differently from that. For one, this guy Harold, who may or may not be pulling an arrow out of his eyeball, has this leg thing here. This leg covering is different. Everybody else has matching socks. He is wearing this thing on his leg that is not protected by a shield. So there is a good argument to be made that this is a charus, basically a what? Chasse, yeah. That this is a chainmail leg covering. And because it's depicted different than these, well, then maybe that might be chainmail and these might be riveted discs. Is that a valid argument? It may not be, but it is an argument. The other thing is, are they basically wearing these like shorts and short sleeve onesies that are made of chainmail? Are these baggy? Are these tight? Is this just the artist's interpretation of a shirt that has a horseback riding friendly slit down the middle? These are the sources of entire careers in academia and history where people are discussing these things. But two, this is where your recognition that a lot of this is interpretation based on written record, based on surviving physical data, and based on things like this that are sort of these hyper-stylized, almost primitive art, where you are having to interpret these things. And this is where that aspect of primary source can be difficult from a visual standpoint. It can also be really charming and engaging. I'm blanking on his name. There's a artist in Jamaica in the 1830s who did lots of regional studies things. This is Juliette. I'm blanking on her last name here. She goes by Cylindric on Twitter, but she does some of these drawings are recent where she's taken these very hyper stylized sculptures and tried to interpolate them into fashion drawings of those characters. So but to move from this to this requires imagination. It requires a degree of contextuality. And it's a really interesting exercise. I think it's a wonderful exercise to do, to look at these types of things and see what you can pull out of them. It's also really fun to do this with monsters. If you look at old illustrations of, woodcut things, here there be dragons, like tried to draw those dragons real using those bases is a lot of fun. Next is secondary sources. These are far more accessible, and I'll move through these a little bit quicker. Basically, secondary source is a source in which the author is providing you with those contexts and those suppositions. We don't know what this chainmail hauberk looks like. Here's what we think it looks like. And this is why. Sometimes there's a why. There's an artist, Peter Connolly, who was the first time I ever saw those recreation arts alongside a drawing of the thing that he's pulling as his source material, and seeing the huge gap between them was really eye-opening for me, and I loved it. Secondary sources so like primary sources, you can get them in book form. Sometimes they're photographic, so this is a thing called People of All Nations. It's basically a pre-National Geographic from the teens and 20s. This is a collection of architectural drawings of Germany from the early 1500s. There's a bunch in book form. We'll talk about where you can find that kind of stuff, but going to libraries is great. There are so many books that have been digitized now in different libraries across the country that you can access. Paintings, all that stuff. The internet is a wealth of it, which is wonderful. But museums are great, things along those lines. Secondary sources are your fashion books, your what do year by year, are people wearing? Kids books, manga drawing guides. There's tons of these different things that can be really useful to you as visual reference from an artist. Also, stuff made for reenactment communities can be incredibly helpful because they get really specific about how shoes are tied, which is great for you. Third is your tertiary source. Easiest way to think of a tertiary source, it's an encyclopedia or something like it. It is a compilation of secondary and primary sources. New information is not being added. It is simply being compiled and presented to you. And tertiary sources are incredibly helpful if you are approaching a new era that you don't know anything about. Not having new information does not mean that it's not value. New era can be like going to a party where you don't know anybody, and a tertiary source is your amiable friend who makes introductions. And last, we've got the narrative source. This isn't a real source, but it is a source for most of us. Most of us come to historical narrative because we encountered a book, we encountered a comic, we encountered a movie, we encountered a play, we encountered a song, something that made us excited to explore that world more. This is where we get the visual iconography that we find as a foundation. Sometimes the narrative is also where we see taste most readily show its face. That taste component is really prevalent in any of the narrative things. It's always a result of the author's inclinations or the group that's making them. My favorite example of this is the Western, because you can never see a Western where they don't have haircuts that are either contemporary or making overtures towards contemporary. Yeah. So here you've got Kevin Costner in his late 80s, early 90s mullet, and McDonald with her very big coiffure there. But you can see, even when there are overtures being made towards historical accuracy, a lot of times they play to the contemporary thing. Like everybody, I mentioned Peaky Blinders earlier, everybody's like, the Peaky Blinders haircut. The Peaky Blinders haircut is still just a variation, it's a slightly more extreme version of what a lot of young folks were wearing at the time. It wouldn't have been done 5 years earlier. It wouldn't have been done 5 years later, even though it's relatively historically accurate. But accuracy is always curation. And I think, where am I here? Yeah. Accuracy is curation. Even when you're being really accurate, you are still picking the parts of accuracy that you want to show. And so you're always going to get this kind of thing, and that's okay. Sorry, I keep hitting the speaker there. So in addition to these spheres, you've also got two other considerations when it comes to design. So we're going to move from the research to the practical. So those are style So when I talk about style, basically I mean the aesthetic sensibilities that you are applying to your work. I would say that from a stylistic standpoint, your best bet is not to try and go with sort of the poetic version of decorum, like trying to marry subject to output. Like, you draw your own way. Draw the way that you draw. For one, you won't be miserable. And two, the way that you draw it is not going to necessarily affect accuracy. So like, you might have medieval characters done by Jean-Francois Kiefer, and you might have historical characters done by Grzegorz Rosinski. Neither one is necessarily going to be more accurate. They're both very accurate to the eras that they're depicting, but they are, the degree of simplicity or busyness is going to be based on the artist's drawing style and not on the subject matter. The best way, and it can also be difficult taking historical stuff and applying it to your style, because you might be looking at Elizabethan dress and saying, well, this is awfully busy and I draw like Charles Schulz. What do I do? My best approach to doing that is to copy the reference, do that drawing, and then put it aside and then draw it again from memory. The stuff that you drew that matters, the shapes, the details, are going to internalize, and you're going to have a more successful marriage of your aesthetic sensibilities and the subject matter if you are effectively inventing the costume. You can then go back and cross-reference it and say, oh, okay, well, the skirt is fuller, I want to add to that skirt, I want to do this. But that can be a really good, helpful starting point. The other is taste. And what was I going to talk about with taste? Oh no, that's not taste. Purpose, that's it. Purpose, the narrative purpose of the design. What is the point of this character within the context of the story? I think that you can't design a character well, you can only design a cast well. Because the characters are defined in relation to each other. You know, The Rock is only The Rock when he's standing next to Kevin Hart. When he's standing next to Shaq, The Rock is Kevin Hart. And when Shaq is standing next to Yao Ming, Shaq becomes The Rock. So it's like, so really the thinking about it through the standpoint of cast is really important, and how that applies. So the way that I usually approach things when I'm working from a design standpoint is I try to break things down into the absolute simplest basic shapes that I can, because otherwise I tend to homogenize the designs. I tend to go for sort of a general default, moderately athletic build with thin limbs that lends itself well to gestural action. And as a result, all my characters end up looking alike. So what I'll do, especially when they have design components that you repeat in historical things. So they're all wearing Elizabethan clothing, they're all wearing armor, they're all wearing something like that. It's really easy to make those shapes all look the same. This forces me to not do that. And so then I can start to say, oh, okay, well, these characters both wear armor, but this one has these Christmas tree aspects, this one has these cross aspects. And I always work silhouette outwards, because then I can more easily differentiate the characters from one another. Now that works really well if you're working in a simpler cartoony style, but if you're working hyper realistically, is it still applicable? And I say yes, and for that I'm going to use as a quick example Sandy Powell's designs for Shakespeare in Love. So Sandy Powell is a costume designer who's done most of my favorite historical design work. She did Orlando, she did Velvet Goldmine, and she also did Shakespeare in Love. She did The Favorite recently. I say recently, it was probably 10 years ago. Recent for me. So Shakespeare in Love is Elizabethan stuff. So you can see the different design things here. You've got the, does this have a, I don't want to hit any button that might be a laser pointer in case it shuts things off. But you can see, you know, the coifs, you can see areas where the neckline is low. You can see how these pants kind of puff up, where there are different things. And so she uses these, she doesn't eschew these in service of taste, but she uses our sense of taste as a contemporary audience watching this to tell us things about the character. So Geoffrey Rush is wearing this Elizabethan garb, but it's a little bit ratty. The cut is really bad and it makes him look very buffoonish. This is sort of like the guy you see in cargo shorts and a tuxedo t-shirt. Like He is of his time. It's lampooning the dress of the time, but it's doing it in a very non-threatening way. And so you can contrast that with the same type of thing with Colin Firth's character. This character, we are not meant to take seriously. This character wants to be taken seriously, and the fact that he wants to be taken seriously while wearing those pants makes us instantly dislike him, and that is important to the narrative. So, he's got all of this stuff going on. He's got the ruffle that makes his head look like a turkey leg. He's got this dangly pearl earring. It's just, and the smug expression, the whole thing. And so we get a sense that that if he can carry himself with this weight, we look at the society through sort of a judgy lens, which is important because most historical narratives, I'm going to get to this in a second too, are born of the protagonist at odds with society. And so anything you can do to augment that through narrative is going to be helpful. And Sandy Powell does that really well. So when we are introduced to Gwyneth Paltrow, she's wearing this, very high neckline thing, and it's very nice and lazy, but it's also very confining. And we see Gwyneth Paltrow when she's at her happiest, which is reading Shakespeare, just in her room in her nightgown, and she's very unencumbered. And after she meets Shakespeare, then this becomes what she wears in public. And so there's a sort of an arc of design shift through Gwyneth Paltrow's dress here that still falls within the realm of it could have happened. And most notably is Shakespeare here, who is, he's still wearing those puffy pants, but those puffy pants have no volume. They just drape and they become regular pants. The closer you can bring your protagonist to your audience, the more readily they can associate themselves and empathize with that character. He's also got, this leather jerkin. It's left undone. It's got a very Byronic, rebel, artisty guy vibe going for it. He's got an earring too. They did have earrings back then, but where Colin Firth has that big dangly pearl. He's got, just a little ring. It's real classy. Some other Sandy Powell things, and this goes to what I'm saying. One of the things that she really does a lot, which I love, is she will highlight the hyper-specificity of an era to the extreme with the antagonist. And because of that, what she does is she lumps all of those social components onto that antagonist. And then when when your protagonist is not only dealing with the thematic elements of the era in which they're living and how it is unfair and how they have to break away from that, but also that society becomes manifest in that antagonist because of the hyper-specificity of their costume. Rather than getting away from that specificity and trying to make something that looks cool, which is a lot of times what different costume designers will. So you get lots of leather, you get lots of black, and I think that finding that aspect of what is there can be really helpful. So how do we find that hyper-specificity? You can watch a movie from the 40s and not necessarily pull out what makes it 40s. How do we do that? How do you say, this is what defines the time? And the best way to do that is to look at cartoonists who hate people. So going back to the 1300s, you can start finding different things that are lampooning fashion trends, and that is such a great thing. So this is an example of when Venetian ladies were wearing these tall hats and these tall shoes to make themselves look taller. Somebody embroiders a pig wearing this exact hat and these exact things, and this pig is one of the best examples we have of what that kind of hat looks like. And so, same things with, critiques of the clergy. There's all the Renard stories of him becoming a bishop or becoming a monk or becoming a priest and fleecing the congregation. This one's carved in wood. There's an artist reproduction of that carving. Give us a really good sense of what that particular monk habit looks like. These are from a book, Ship of Fools, from the late 1400s. And so this is basically talking about folks who are slaves to fashion. And so you can get a really good sense as to what that particular fashion is. There's more and more of these. I love this one, which has the title. Oh my gosh, it's from an anti-royalist pamphlet. So the guy on the left, Prince Rupert, sometimes called Prince Robert, was really hated by the Puritans. Thank you so much. Wrap this up really quick and we'll get to questions. Is really hated by the Puritans, and so they put out all these pamphlets, and one of the things that they hated was how decadent his lifestyle is and his menagerie of animals. So he had this dog Boy that they always draw with him everywhere, and they're like, he would sick Boy on all the Puritan people and make them tear their, he didn't. And then he had a monkey, and the argument was that because his court was so decadent, one of his cronies married the monkey. And so the title of this pamphlet is, earlier, in the discussion about crowdfunding, the talk about pithy titles that you have the only title. I think this is the only title. The humorous tricks and conceits of Prince Robert's malignant she-monkey discovered to the world before her marriage, also the marriage of her marriage to a cavalier, and within 3 days' space, how she called him cuckold to his face. So anyway, so you can get this stuff. The reason I wanted to do this lecture in the first place is that down in the Billy, in their archives, there are a number of examples of prints by George Cruikshanks, and basically what he did was, so here's some more examples again of talking about these different things. But he did this series called Monstrosities, which were these really popular prints where each year he would draw these grotesque versions of fashionable things. And so as a result of this, you can look at these designs and say, oh, okay, I can see what makes this different from the ones near. And you can use these as really helpful examples for finding what makes specific period dress look specific and really playing with those notions. So we're out of time for the things, but here's one with these hats. In 1827, apparently these giant hats were a thing. Here's another cartoon from another person about how horrible it is to go to a museum with people in these giant hats. You get the idea. The sort of running theme in all of these is that these fashion choices emasculate men and make women old and unlovable and unsexy, which is a trend continued today in political cartoons, anytime they relate to fashion stuff. I really love this one, which is basically talking about the dress reform movement and how if women are allowed to wear pants, they'll want to become cops and they'll get drunk and ignore street fights. Let's go to questions. We don't have we have a few minutes. So yes.
So when working on a project and trying to figuring out how to visually communicate a setting.
Yeah.
One of the things that I personally struggled with is getting so caught up in trying to be accurate, and use that in a broad sense, in interpreting and showcasing something. And it's gotten so bad for me where I have spent a week trying to find a cash register that would have been used in Japan in around 1979. What would you suggest for cartoonists that are working on historical projects, when to say either keep digging or it's okay?
Okay, so the question is, for the recording, when do you go from you need to keep digging for research to saying this is enough research for where I am, if you can't find particular specific information? That is the constant struggle, and if I knew the answer, I would have a much bigger output. I think for a lot of times it's dependent person for person. I look at it to no small part of how much bearing does a particular element have in the story itself. If your story takes place in this store in Japan in the 1970s and this person is always at the register, you keep digging. You watch old movies from that era, you do screenshots, of anything. You try to find anything that takes place in a store. You look at old catalogs. You're also talking about another issue, which is how difficult it can be to find resources that are not available in English. That can be incredibly difficult. It's easier if you have some familiarity with the language, if you have some familiarity with the region, if you are able to travel there. But that is a huge hindrance. I found that I try to do research on Chinese stuff every once in a while, and I am constantly hitting walls because I don't know where, I can get books, but I don't know which are the numbers. I can't translate every single thing to find is this the region or is this the area that I need, et cetera. So it can be really difficult, but I think that thank you. A lot of it is based on how much does it matter to that particular story. And again, narrative sources may not be perpetually accurate, but movies made during a particular period are frequently primary sources that you can look back to. So if it's something as recent as the 1970s, it's not necessarily easy to find, but it is findable, which is great. Other questions? Okay, in the absence of other questions, I did want to say some of my absolute favorite resources. My very favorite ones are, first, if you can find yourself involved with reenactment communities. That doesn't mean that you have to do reenactment, but if there is an era that you're interested in that does reenactment, talking to those people, finding their resources, asking them questions. They are essentially living history people most of the time and can be really helpful. I did a lot of boat-related things, and I crewed on a historic tall ship for a while because it was really helpful. Now I can draw ships from memory rather than having to do reference, or from imagination rather than having to do reference, because I know how all the lines work. So that's a good resource. Kids' books from the 1980s and 1990s tend to be really great because from the late 70s through the mid 80s, there were a number of programs in mostly Great Britain and Italy that had historical recreation as a sub discipline in art school. And so you had all these people graduating at the same time, creating these amazing books from mostly Usborne, Kingfisher, DK, and a variety of other things. Some of them are still in print in different formats, like this Shakespeare Theater cutaway book. But those things are great for environments, especially. They are specific to the more popular time period, so that makes them slightly less versatile, but they're great. Yeah. Yeah, Osprey for military history. If you're doing any conflict stuff, I've got tons of Osprey books, which are great. And then any of these, historic costume books. This one is Nancy Bradfield. You've got John Peacock does a bunch. In the blue shirt, you had a question.
Yes, I did. Sorry, I thought just one behind me.
Oh, no trouble.
So my question was, in terms of taking up people for primary sources,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I was researching something in a certain area of Massachusetts. I couldn't track down the person. Do you have any suggestions for when you hit people up, how to come off as less of a weirdo?
I think I found that it's okay to be a weirdo. Just say, I'm working on a book. I'm a cartoonist. It's real. I read 6 biographies of Benjamin Franklin, and I don't know what his pants look like. Can you help me? And so that a lot of times people are really happy to share that info. Academics love some break in the monotony of what their expertise can be used for, and so that can be really nice. And also, people like to see their research and their fields of study reflected accurately, and you're giving them an opportunity to see that. If you're asking them to write up a big thing, that's an entirely different thing than asking them to point you to some source material. All right, I think we maybe have time for one more question, if anybody has one. Yes.
So you worked as a deckhand?
I worked as a deckhand, yeah.
On what type of ship?
Two different things. So one on a recreation of either the Nina or the Pinta. They sailed together, and I can't remember which one I was on. But the one I spent a couple weeks on was the Lady Washington, which comes out of Portland. And if any of y'all know the work of Lucy Bellwood, who's an absolutely phenomenal cartoonist and a great comics thinker, if you ever get a chance to listen to her essays just about comics in general, like she's just got really great theories and thoughts and foundational stuff. She did that. Like, she left home at 16 and was on it for 3 years, and so she put me in touch with the people to do it. And so it was a great experience. It was a harrowing experience because you're up 90 feet over, like furling a sail, and
Yeah, you're on a windshield.
yeah, but it was neat. And there's a lot of things like that can be done. A lot of the ones that we have here tend to be American history stuff. So if you like older things, you're going to have to travel for that. But those things exist, and people are there as resources that you can reach out to. So thank you all, everybody, so very, very much for coming out. And I'll bring some of these books out there. I did not use them. I don't know why I brought them. But if anybody wants to glance at them. The other thing is, go to academic libraries, because they tend to keep stuff a lot longer. They don't cull their collections the way that public libraries need to better suit the needs of their patrons. And so if an academic library will let you in and let you into their history section, their geography section, architecture, clothing, you can find stuff from the 40s, 50s, 70s that will be hugely helpful to doing research stuff. So thank you.